I got an email telling me that I had been suspended, so I was forbidden from entering the office and studio, and that I was being investigated by the student union under allegations of putting the health and safety of other students at risk. And at that interview, I was presented with hard copies, screenshots of my X account.
What as a society have we done to 19, 20-year-olds? They are enacting Soviet Union style thinking, and to them it's just for the greater good.
Girls were going up to him saying, "Do you know where you are? Get out of the toilet." And his first response, without hesitation, to all of us was, "I identify as a woman." So some of the stories that they told, these people were telling me, were really heartbreaking about the consequences when they spoke out, what happened to them. We actually cut that out.
Connie Shaw, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Jack.
Yes. So it's really great. You're the youngest person I've had on my podcast so far. I think there's 10 years between us, but when I was your age, if I was even a 10th as astute politically, I would have been doing pretty well. So you've been making such a splash.
That's very kind. Thank you. That's very kind.
Honestly, it's very true. I mean, I was listening to some of your podcasts before this, actually. So I listened to one of Graham Linehan and then your podcast at the Reform UK conference. So yeah, I'm very impressed on just how articulate, and I know 20 is not a child, but I mean, I couldn't have dreamed to know as much as you do, and you're obviously still learning day by day, still being at uni, as well as your bravery for just everything I've seen the past couple of months. I'm sure it's been overwhelming for you. So yeah, you should be very proud.
Yeah, it has been overwhelming. Yeah, thank you. Thanks.
So maybe some of my audience aren't aware of you. I have lots of American viewers. Maybe some of them are. So I guess you will find out now. But how about we go back to before some of the cancellation attempt that you're surviving now and doing really well with, before all of this started, because obviously, a lot of this is to do with the gender topic. I know some other topics might weave through this too. When did you first become aware of, the gender identity, transgender issue, and how did then your feelings towards it morph over time?
I actually cannot put my finger on when it was that I first became aware of the idea that trans women were women, because I just remember that being just a thing. At school, I did describe myself as a feminist, and we learnt about the civil rights movement in America in GCSE history, and that included the women's liberation movement, and we would compare that to the now women's movement, which was a bit more, the women's liberation movement was seen as like more radical feminists, and women now were seen as more liberal feminism. And so that I remember feeling really emotionally connected, like it made me feel very emotional, like learning about that stuff. And then when I went into sixth form, one of my friends and I inherited the Feminist Society, and we would lead that every week. But yeah, I remember over lockdown, so I was 15 or 16 over lockdown, and it was just one of those things that, trans women are women. It would never occur to me to question that. And I remember I was posting infographics all the time, mainly about BLM, because that was the biggest thing going on. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that I posted during lockdown was an infographic of a cartoon of a vulva, and the same photo was put side by side, and above one it said woman, and above the other it said man/non-binary, and above that it said vulva doesn't define gender. And I shared that saying, if you don't agree with this, you're simply transphobic. And then followed that up with the caption to that post saying, for the dense people who don't understand the reality of identity. I didn't even know what I was talking about. Like, I just saw this and thought, wow, yeah, that's really progressive, and people can be whoever they want. And then it was only towards the end of school in year 13 when, because I was one of the leaders of the Feminist Society, the school had a podcast, which you can still listen to on Spotify, and they asked if I would do an interview with a student in my year who was trans, female, who didn't want to identify as female. And we did that podcast. In that podcast, she told me that her life expectancy was now 30 because she was trans, and she would talk about the suicidality rate of trans people. And I came away from that interview feeling very emotional and very sorry for her, because she clearly was in so much distress. Like, she was getting upset as well, describing how awful it was. And then I
sorry to
remember
interrupt, but was her life expectancy idea based on the fact that she might commit suicide, or was it that she might be murdered?
Yeah. I'm not sure. I think it was a mixture of two. I don't know.
Yeah.
She didn't say. She just said, as far as I think, she just said, my life expectancy is now 30. Mm-hmm. I don't know where that starts from.
Sounds a bit like another kind of self-fulfilling argument.
Yeah, and so then after that, I remember just speaking to another friend at school saying, I just don't understand this, because as feminists, we're trying to move away from gender stereotypes. So why firstly would anyone feel like they were born in the wrong body? Like, you'd hope that no one these days would be born and live and feel that they don't fit in with the body that they're in, because surely to have that feeling, we would have had to reinforce gender stereotypes. So if someone is saying that they feel like they're in the wrong body, why would we then affirm that belief, having already clearly enforced gender stereotypes on them? Why would we continue to do that? And I remember my friends saying, God, yeah, I'd never thought about it like that. And that was the end of that conversation. So I'd had the seed planted in my head. And then 4 months later, I was at uni. And everywhere are symbols and, you know, signs of gender ideology, whether that's pride progress flags, absolutely everywhere. Pronouns at the end of everyone's emails, pronouns on the name badges of the staff members who work at the union. And I think it was in my second year when I had listened to a podcast on BBC Radio 4 called the Antisocial Podcast. And it was an interview. They were doing like a debate between Susan Smith, who's one of the directors of For Women Scotland, and a trans woman whose name I can't remember, but I think the trans woman was part of a trans organisation charity. Mm-hmm. And I realised that I was agreeing with everything that Susan was saying. And at that time, I had just started on Leeds Student Radio, and I was doing Politics Hour with 3 other hosts. And I suggested that we try and get Susan on for an interview, because it was a very hotly debated topic and something we see and take for granted all the time at uni. And I think in the meantime as well, gender expression funds had been popping up at different universities. And I saw a couple of my friends at other universities share in a celebratory way when their student union introduced a gender expression fund. And then within a few weeks, I got an email at Leeds saying the Gender Expression Fund is finally here. And the Gender Expression Fund is a grant that trans and gender non-conforming students can apply for £50 to buy gender-affirming products. And on that list includes clothes, makeup, binders, tuckers. And under the bit for binders, it literally comes with a disclaimer. This is on the union's website, which literally as far as I'm aware, is still up. Anyone can find it. It has a huge list of disclaimers saying the medical risks of binders are basically unknown, but these are some of the risks that could happen if you choose to wear one. Respiratory issues, rib fractures. Do not wear it for more than 8 hours a day. Do not wear it to sleep. If you feel like you're struggling to breathe, take it off. Do not try and make your own makeshift binder. It's like the union are giving money to students to buy these things, knowing that there are all these risks, or at least accepting the fact that the rate at which those risks could occur is unknown. So I think by that point I was like, what is this? So yeah, we did the interview with Susan, and she advised that I apply to go to Living Freedom, which is a freedom of speech festival put on by the Academy of Ideas and Living Freedom, which Claire Fox runs, Baroness Claire Fox. And in the meantime, I decided that I'd want to write my dissertation on gender identity and sex-based rights. So I'd started reading Helen Joyce. And then I met Helen Joyce at Living Freedom, which was amazing. And we had a chat. And then towards the end of summer, Tickle versus Giggle happened in Australia, and that was it. I could not bear to... I felt like I just wanted to start saying something, so I started tweeting about it and decided that I wanted to start my own podcast when I went back to uni. And I had also been elected during all of this time. Sorry, I'm getting the time. So many things happen. It's hard to keep track of the timeline. I'm sorry if it's confusing, but
my story will be similar, Susan, don't worry.
Yeah, the interview with Susan, between the interview with Susan and me starting my new podcast, I had been elected to become the daytime editor at Leeds Student Radio, or LSR, as we refer to it as. And that would mean that I would be overseeing the talk shows, which included Politics Hour, Women's Hour, LGBTQ Hour, But Where Are We Really From, and Safe Space, which is the show for ethnic minorities and one about neurodivergency and mental health. And so, yeah, I went back into my third year this September, taking up this new position on the committee and starting my own podcast. And that's when everything started to go a bit downhill in terms of my reputation and what students thought about me.
Yeah, well, I'm very impressed. You just said, I'm just going to do it all. And just you went for it. Did you, I mean, how likely did you feel backlash would arrive in due course?
Oh,
subscribe to my Substack, Jack Jewell Uncut. This is where you will get my full, uncut, untamed, and unashamed takes too controversial for YouTube, including early access to all videos, a private members chat where you can talk to me, and bonus footage seen nowhere else, including this episode.
I was told once by a male PE teacher that I was not allowed to wear leggings because he felt uncomfortable.
How would you describe your politics? Could you help explain to us why so many younger college-age people who align with trans ideology seem to also align with communist views?
Link on screen and in the description.
So likely. Like, I remember when we had like pre-season training for the new academic year as a committee, the first meeting we had to introduce ourselves and give our pronouns. And that was the first time after I had decided I am not doing this anymore that I was like, wow, what do I say now? Because I don't want to do this. So I just said my name and like what course I did, because I think we had to say our name, pronouns, and what course. So I just said my name and course, and no one seemed to bat an eyelid, but I was the only one who didn't say my pronouns. I don't know if anyone else noticed. But because I knew what I wanted to be talking about wouldn't be popular, I purposely made sure that I uploaded my podcast to my own Spotify account, because most people who start a podcast at LSR, they all get uploaded to the same Spotify.
Right.
So I wanted it to be my own, but also I was very aware that I would have to do that anyway, because if I started, even the first episode, I went to the Reform UK conference on a media pass as LSR, but because I was in my committee position, it's not like I had to go through I wonder now, looking back, if I had gone through the higher ups, if I'd said, look, I want to go to the Reform UK conference, would they have said, oh, because I've had some people suggest that I shouldn't be platforming Reform UK, that I shouldn't even be covering it. But I would have gone to all of the political party conferences if I could have. But it just so happened that I had met someone through the freedom of speech events that I went to that works within the party and helped me get a media pass. Because what student radio station is getting a media pass to go to a party political conference?
Yeah. I mean, was it the Birmingham one? Because I was there actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it was. Yeah.
I just went as a member. So yeah, I mean, I would be very skeptical a uni would, because Reform UK are almost just like Nazi central. But you never know. I mean, I think hearing your story, especially because you're a once true believer, I guess, if you want to put it that way, and how young you are, and being in the uni environment and overcoming these issues and challenging yourself and thinking critically, I think it paints a really good picture for, millennials like me, kind of. People often bash your generation a lot when, if it's anyone's fault that people are woke, as it were, it's the older generation that created this environment for them, rather than Gen Z, who are just, doing the best they can, I guess. But I think it gives a lot of hope for the world, and also for younger people too, or I'm sure lots of other people at university who are in a similar situation to you and maybe don't feel like they can speak. How common do you think that is? I mean, I'm sure people who feel like they can't be public with their views.
I think that it is very common, if not way more common than I would initially imagine, because after I was suspended or permanently suspended, and the news broke, so to speak, I had a lot of people messaging me, students at lots of different unis across the country, including Leeds, telling me that they were really pleased to see someone their own age or someone at uni talking about this topic. And some of the stories that they told these people were telling me were really heartbreaking about the consequences when they spoke out, what happened to them. And I just know that I was very lucky that I knew who to go to, and that I already was a member of the Women's Rights Network, and I have friends within the Academy of Ideas and people who believe in freedom of speech. I already knew a lot of gender critical people, so I didn't feel alone in that sense. But I think it is very common. I'm absolutely inundated with messages from students telling me that they feel the same or have experienced similar to me. So I think it is extremely common.
Yeah, that's really good to hear in one way, because I think the more it takes a few strong voices until people become more emboldened. And whether you agree with Trump or not, or, you hate him, or you think you're kind of ambivalent, whatever. One thing I do hope that changes is enough people are going to say, like, we're done with this bullshit. Like, let's talk. That the people who have spent years trying to suppress speech by firing people, by, getting people kicked off campus, defriending people, all that kind of stuff. I'm hoping that once you take the power away from them, then, they kind of F off, really, because they realize that they can't kick and scream anymore. So I think your voice is very integral to that. So you should be proud.
And also, those people who message me, they're the ones who are brave enough to message me. Some of the messages, I've had quite a few where they said, I would love to follow you, but if my friends saw that I was following you, that would be enough for them to kick off.
Oh God, I can't bear it.
Which is obviously very, very similar to that story with the, what was that speech charity that James Esses revealed the other day, that guy who has had to apologise just for following Tommy Robinson. I mean, no wonder young, normal people feel that way when actual organisations are reprimanding their members for doing it. So.
Yeah, and I think it's very telling to this progressive mindset that we've fostered in people, because there is a portion of people who actually believe that if you follow someone like that, you agree with everything they say, like they genuinely believe that, because they curate their echo chambers on their technology platforms to be a perfect feed of all of their existing opinions, to just entrench them more and more. And, you see this on Instagram, someone posts a reel and then there's all these comments being like, oh, I liked you, but now unfollow. So it's quite scary that people believe that. But I try and just, for me, I guess I'd be interested to know how you cope and everything, but I try and kind of pity them a little bit, because for me, kind of having had some of that mindset before, I know how miserable it is and how.
Oh yeah. What is it? Because you used to sort of have that. You used to sort of be similar to that mindset.
Yeah, kind of the woke mindset, and mine came much later from sort of queer circles in London, and it lasted for about, just short of 2 years, in terms of me kind of learning concepts such as, microaggressions and privilege and a lot of the gender stuff. Although I never really knew what was going on with kids until I had already kind of come out the other side. But I just remember how, delicate that mindset was, and how you kind of relished in the fact of being able to, like, name and shame someone in a group. It's actually really awful.
Yeah. I was the person doing that when I was at school. I had a reputation for being a snitch anyway. Not just about sort of woke stuff, but in general, I felt like I had a really strong duty to call out things that I thought were wrong. And some of the things that I would tell teachers about were seriously wrong. Like, there are some things I would never regret, like people being assaulted, for example, or just really horrific things that definitely teachers should know about. And this was when I was maybe 12 or 13.
When you were kind of preparing to launch your podcast and all this kind of stuff, what was the feeling like for you being around students where, everyone was buying into certain ideas and you were questioning it? Because for me, I've been in groups where, possibly people don't know about my channel yet or whatever. And it almost feels like you're kind of going a bit insane because you feel like you're this kind of one person in a haystack of people that all believe one thing, and then you're the person kind of feeling like you're in some psyop,
I don't think I felt I released the first episode of the podcast in late September, but before then, over the summer, this summer just gone in 2024 it was transformative. I was already doubting stuff, but I spent hours watching Helen Joyce. I would spend hours watching Andrew Gould's podcast Heretics. And just hearing all of these stories, all of the doubts that I had, were confirmed. And then the first episode, obviously, I did was when I was at the Reform UK conference. And then Freshers Week of university, the first night I went out on a Monday night, I went to the toilet and there was a man in the toilet and girls were going up to him saying, "Do you know where you are? Get out of the toilet." And his first response without hesitation to all of us was, "I identify as a woman." And the fact that I had this summer where I had been like, "Oh my God, this whole thing is a lie." And then I witnessed like it happening in real life. And so I took a photo of the guy just because I was like, if I tell someone about this, they're not going to believe me. So I felt like I had to take a photo, and I did.
And was he attempting to present stereotypically female? No, not at all. But not that it matters. But he didn't. Did he a straight guy?
I have no idea. He was just standing there. It didn't look like he was waiting for anyone. He wasn't trying to get into a cubicle. He was just standing there watching.
Ew.
And so I tweeted the next day saying, "This happened to me last night," and that went pretty viral. And the next day, on the Tuesday morning, that was the first time where I had a discussion with people who definitely disagreed with me. And I was explaining what was going on, and I showed the photo, and the people I was talking to were like, "But he's clearly not making an effort. He's clearly not a real trans woman. So don't make this about trans." And I said, it was a girl telling me this, and I said, like, "Do you think putting makeup on and making an effort to look feminine, is that what makes you a woman?" And and I think she could realize where I was going with this, i.e. if him putting makeup on, if I don't put makeup on, that surely doesn't make me less of a woman. So why would he be more of a woman if he did put makeup on? I think she could see where I was going. So she basically doubled down and said, "Yeah, it is part of my womanhood to put makeup on." I was like, I just thought that was a really sexist and regressive thing to think these days, but okay.
Wow.
But that was a really tense discussion. But and after that, I think it was pretty obvious what I thought. But then the second episode that I did was with Charlie Bently-Astor, and she's a detransitioner. And it was after that the student backlash got so much that I ended up purchasing my Free Speech Union membership because the person who helped me edit the video, who I credited in a caption because he put so much time into helping me, he received a formal complaint against him within another society. And the outcome of it was he was told that he must distance himself from me and my work. And if he didn't, further measures would be taken. So I thought, well, if they're going to do that to someone who helped me edit something, then it's probably quite likely that they're going to come for me. So at that point, I purchased my Free Speech Union membership. And a few weeks later, I ended up needing to use it.
Well, you can come for me next, Leeds. It's Leeds, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Gosh. So with the podcast, were you sharing it publicly online, or did someone just end up finding it? You were?
No, so I was sharing it public because I was like, I'm not going to do this. The whole point of me doing it was because I wanted to make people see something that they probably wouldn't have seen before, and think about it. And the clip that I shared with Charlie, I purposely made it quite provocative because I wanted to catch people's attention. And it was a very short clip of her saying, when people talk about happy trans people, like, who are they referring to? Because I don't know anyone, is the words that she said. And she is someone who used to identify as trans, and her whole peer group was sort of gender non-conforming. And this is just from her own experience, that she says that she doesn't know a single trans person who is genuinely happy, or at least she believes that they have other issues going on. And so I used that clip, basically knowing, so, I had maybe like 30 followers. And then one person shared it on their story and said that feeling when you get either an alt or far right podcast on LSR before you get GTA 6.
Oh.
And whistleblowers within group chats that I wasn't on were telling me the things that people were saying about it. And basically that it was far right and calling me a TERF in a derogatory way, and basically saying how on earth can this podcast exist? Like, it's hate speech. Even though all I was doing was interviewing a detransitioner.
What as a society have we done to, 19, 20-year-olds? I feel bad for them because we've created this environment where they are enacting, Soviet Union style thinking and actions. And to them, it's just like for the greater good. It's very scary.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, when I was a teenager, I'm 30. So, but when I was a teenager, no one even talked about politics. I mean, our social media was, we were on Facebook. It was just about kind of silly things, but there was and even at drama school, university for me, I did musical theater, and that industry is that is now the pinnacle of wokeness. It's very much up there. And even then, me graduating in 2016, even then we barely talked about anything. I don't think I heard trans mentioned once. Fast forward 2 years later, suddenly like everyone's ready for everyone to lose their job over that. And one thing you said to me, actually, I relate to so much, because when I started, I had kind of a spiraling, very similar to yours. And for some reason, and maybe you can give me some insight as well into kind of what has made your mindset the type to be like, I'm going to do this, because I've always found it really difficult to kind of sit back when I see injustice. So I was just like, oh my God, I felt so motivated to do it. But one of the things I kind of secretly thought about were a lot of people I potentially know or acquaintances of mine who have always known me to be a very lovely, amicable person, that very much believe a lot of this stuff, suddenly seeing like, oh, what the hell? And yeah, I've also suffered all the backlash from that, but it's kind of a double-edged sword, isn't it? Because it's sort of good for people to be challenged, even if they end up not agreeing with you. But then you also have to accept that you'll potentially lose people.
Yeah. I think, like I said, I felt like I always had this feeling, like similar to you, I guess, to call out injustice or when something was wrong. But, and at school, I wasn't very popular with the boys at school because I think they felt like they couldn't say anything around me because I would never hold back. I've basically always been very opinionated, but I think people from school are extremely surprised to see the direction that I've now taken. But I think the reason that I was able to, the thing that I have always been critical of is Islam. And at school, I was openly very critical of Islam. And I did GCSE RS, I did it at A level, and now I'm doing that at uni. And I was like an ardent atheist. I was obsessed with Christopher Hitchens. I wrote my EPQ. Religious studies. And I wrote my EPQ, which is a 5,000 word research paper worth half an A level, which takes over everyone's life, it feels like, in sick form, people who do it. I wrote that on how the Catholic Church and Catholicism shared similar ideals to European fascist ideology. Like, I hated religion. And now actually that's a whole another thing. But I was very openly critical of religion. I almost made it part of, I didn't make it part of my personality, but I loved talking about it so much. I think people would get quite fed up.
And were you able to, were you around any other Muslims? Were you able to talk like?
Oh no.
Okay, so it wasn't.
There weren't any Muslims in my year. I think there were a couple throughout school, but I'm from Suffolk and it is a very white county. But
Sounds like a bigoted county then. It sounds like a far right.
Oh yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's a very rural county, and I work in my local pub, and some of the things I hear there,
It just
it's a good job I'm not
reminded me
woke
of
anymore.
someone I met recently in kind of a queer setting, and they were talking about Bath, where they're from, and I was like, oh, I
Bath.
love Bath, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I've been there once, you know, did you like it? They were like, and I said, why not? And they said, you know, it's very white, it's very Tory. And I was thinking, you know, this is an English town, you know.
Yeah, yeah. What did you expect? But I think that's quite a common thing. Like, someone was telling me the other day. Someone in politics was telling me the other day that a London school did a school trip out of London, and the kids could not believe how white it was because they were so used to being in London. And it's like people forget that the rest of the country is outside of big cities is pretty white.
Yeah, yeah. It isn't a bad thing. It's just like the native population.
That's just how it is. But yeah, I feel like being an atheist and recognizing the similarities between religion in general and gender ideology, how it is like a secular religion, and the fact that there are blasphemy laws, I think that helped me to be able to recognize how it was wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally agree with that. How did you first hear that you were in trouble?
So I went to the Battle of Ideas. This is how ironic the whole thing is, actually. We went to the Battle of Ideas as LSR on media passes, and the Battle of Ideas is a freedom of speech festival. And we got the tickets, the media passes, because of my connections with Alistair Donald, who runs Living Freedom and helps run the Academy of Ideas.
So you arranged it.
We secured interviews. Yeah. And it was great. We did a ticket giveaway. No, I know. I was like, I wonder if they're going to allow this once they look into it. But then I remember people saying, oh no, this looks really interesting. I'm actually quite jealous. I'd quite like to go. And I was thinking, oh, if, you know, cause these are really woke people saying this to me. And we arranged interviews as LSR through the Academy of Ideas, but I'd also managed to personally secure interviews with Andrew Gold and Graham Linehan. And the interview with Graham went out on the 29th of October. Sorry, on the 28th of October. On the 29th, he published an article that I wrote for his Substack where I described how gender ideology was being pushed at uni. And then on the 30th of October, I got an email telling me that I had been suspended from my committee position within LSR and as a member. So I was forbidden from entering the office and studio, and that I was being investigated by the student union under allegations of putting the health and safety of other students at risk, of acting not in a duty of care, acting in a selfish way, and for bringing LSR into disrepute. And I asked them multiple times over email, could you please specify exactly what it is that I have done wrong? Because in the original letter, they said to me, these allegations come as a result of your social media productions and Substack, but they couldn't specify what exactly about my social media, what exactly about my Substack or my podcast that it was that had led to this very serious action to be taken. And I went to an interview that I had to go to as part of the investigation. And at that interview, I was presented with hard copies of my Substack article and hard copies of screenshots of my X account. And it was like, I do know this is my Twitter. Like, it's like they felt like they were showing me something that I'd never seen before. Like, how we caught you. It was like, of course, I look at X all the time, every day. You think I don't know what's on my X? That's what it felt like. I was like, yeah, this is what I say online. What is the problem? And some of the screenshots included comments and posts from people that weren't me. And I asked, like, why have you included this? And I said, am I being held responsible for what other people post? And they said, yeah, you could be held responsible for creating a certain culture online.
That is painful.
Yeah. And yeah, so they said to me, this investigation has nothing to do with your right to hold and say gender critical views.
But these are like grown adults working at the uni.
Mm. Yeah, well, they're often young people. Yeah. They're either people who've just left uni or, you know. Yeah, no, they're not students.
Okay.
But yeah, they told me it was nothing to do with having the right to hold or say gender critical views. But immediately after that disclaimer, they asked me, how do you maintain an inclusive environment at LSR when your choice to publicly post your views makes some people feel unincluded? And they also asked me, how do you support trans people and trans activists in LSR considering your views? The implication being that because I'm gender critical, I actively try and not support those who I disagree with, and that I actively discriminate against them.
What does it even mean, though, to say, like, is it our duty to support everyone? I mean, it's, you could say it's your duty to not be disrespectful or deliberately abuse someone, but, do you have to go around supporting every single person? I don't get it.
I guess the issue was for them is I wonder, I'm sure the complaint would have been made against me anyway, but it was even more paramount because my role was overseeing LGBTQ Hour and overseeing Women's Hour. And I think they were trying to see whether there were any issues with my ability to carry out my role in an impartial way. And in the outcome, they actually dropped all the allegations of misconduct. So, and they found that there was no reason for me not to be able to carry out my role properly, considering my views. Like they said, there was, like, you were still able to carry out your role fine, but they did find me guilty of bringing LSR into disrepute. Again, they didn't specify how I'd done that. But they told me that if I did want to run for committee again, I could only do this if I provided a written apology to the wider membership and took mandatory training in online conduct.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. And then at that point, because the Free Speech Union had been helping me, the story was given to the Telegraph, and there we
You've been catapulted into which is why one of the reasons why I'm sitting here with you. Yeah, I mean, so like, it's the LGBTQ hour. It's hard to imagine that being compatible, but I mean, if you were to host that, would you just be interviewing LGBTQ people, or?
I would never put myself, so I was overseeing, but I was never one of the presenters on any of these shows. So each show has 4 presenters, and I purposely didn't put myself on any because I had done Politics Hour the year before, and I wanted to give it to students who'd never done student radio before, because they're already structured shows that they apply to do rather than them having to come up with their own concept. And not once did I ever, I told them in the interview that I purposely selected trans activists to be on both Women's Hour and on LGBTQ+ Hour. In the application forms which I made, one of the questions I asked was, what do you see as being the biggest hurdle for LGBTQ rights or women's rights? Knowing that I would get some people saying trans rights. And I did that partially because that's a very reasonable question to ask for someone who wants to talk about these things, but also because I was aware of my own biases. And because I knew that I would be talking publicly about being gender critical, I wanted to make a point of showing that just because I don't believe in trans doesn't mean that I don't think people who do believe in it shouldn't be able to talk about it. Like, a student radio station should be reflecting the views of students. So I made sure to put that question in there because I knew that I would get people saying trans rights. Mm-hmm. So then I could select them and make sure that I was making a point of not being biased.
It's very clever
those
of
presenters
to do that.
Well, I don't necessarily see it as being clever. It's like I think any good daytime editor or someone overseeing those shows would do. I mean, you wouldn't be able to not. It would be very unlikely to have any applicants, to have a whole group of applicants and none of them say that they thought trans rights were very important. But those people on LGBTQ Hour, not once have I told them, you need to be covering this. I just say to all of the presenters, if you need help, I'm here, but this is your show and I don't want to interfere with it. Because when I was doing it last year, me and my 3 other presenters loved the fact that we were kind of left to it. And we could just choose how to structure the show. The only thing I ever said to any of them was that these are talk shows. And so 70% of it needs to be you talking and discussing rather than playing music. So I appreciate, especially for Women's Hour and LGBTQ Hour, and even, but where are you really from? You could get stuck in we're just going to play gay anthems, or we're just going to play Afro beats, or we're just going to play music by female artists. Like, I don't want them to be those kind of shows. Like, they're about talking. And so that's the only thing I've ever said to them. And yeah, it's an allegation that has been thrown at me through people actually a couple of people messaged me saying, like, how can you say that you were able to be impartial when you were literally overseeing LGBTQ Hour? And like, even in the article that I wrote for Graham's Substack, I described how I purposely put trans activists on the show to sort of cover my back and say, yeah, I might disagree with the fact that my pronouns were put on next to my name on the poster that was put on the wall as part of the committee display. I wasn't asked if I wanted my pronouns next to my name. I wasn't even asked what my pronouns were, which I thought was the whole point. But I said, just because I disagree with this area of the policy doesn't mean I don't let trans activists onto the show. Like, I feel like I have gone out of my way to make sure that people feel like they're being represented, yet for some reason my views is still... Like, it would be the same as saying that imagine if I didn't accept someone's application for Politics Hour because in their application they wrote something that I disagreed with. Now, who says that every producer of every political show is agreeing with everything their presenter says? That's just not true. And people who think that is true, that just shows that the only experience they've ever had is student journalism. Because as much as student journalism is a great start, I'm sorry, but before all of this, I've done work experience at LBC, and lots of them have done work experience at many different, the BBC and loads of other proper adult journalism radio stations. But the idea that some people would assume that the producer had to agree or support with everything the presenters were saying, I just can't believe they think that. And because it's an allegation that's been put to me quite a few times. To me, it's like, you have no idea if that's how you think journalism works, and clearly student journalism hasn't taught you very much.
Yeah, I think the Overton window has shifted so much that they just see it like you suggesting, oh, this is free speech and we're talking about consent. So like, let's have a pedophile on and let's have this. Like, I genuinely think people see it as that, which is why they're not able to understand, we should. Oh, yeah.
Well, one person said that there was a person defending me. And in response to that person, someone said, would you defend a rape advocate if they were to have a civilized conversation about rape?
There you go.
And, I think that they see what I'm talking about as being almost as bad, or, to the point where you could possibly use a comparison to make that argument.
Yeah. I always just think it's so impressive what the activists and the charities and the medical industry, what they've managed to do, because they've done a good job at like making everyone believe that these things are like this. The Telegraph contacted you, you've been on DB News, you've been on Talk TV. You've done bloody better than me since I started. So in such a short space of time. I tweeted one day, I was like, I would not choose to be cancelled ever, but you can see how when it happens to people, sometimes if they want to have any sort of ability to be, public or having a platform of any kind, it's like you're the new shiny toy or something. I don't say that to minimize you.
No, I know. I completely get what you mean. And I constantly feel like I'm going to wake up from this dream. Because the point is, I wanted to go into journalism anyway, hence my involvement in student radio and having my own podcast and going as a journalist to conferences. So yeah, it has been great, and I hope to continue using any platform that I may have to talk about freedom of speech and other issues that I'm passionate about. But I think, I am just extremely lucky, because the truth is, it's not hard to get cancelled at university. Like, there are so many people that this happens to who are brave and just do what I do. I could have easily had no idea about the Free Speech Union and just been suspended from my role and think, great, well, that's it then.
Yeah.
And nothing would have happened. But luckily for me, I already knew about the Free Speech Union. And I already had sort of contacts in place to make a good thing out of a bad thing. Right. So, it's not, I don't like being, I'm not saying this is what you're calling me, you know, but lots of people do say, oh, it's so brave, but it's like, it shouldn't be brave. And I guess in a way it is, but it doesn't feel brave to me because I have such a strong network of people.
Yeah.
But for most students, they are stuck in a bubble and have no one to speak to. They may be living with housemates. I know someone who, their housemate has said that if she ever met me, she would punch me. And that person is having to live with someone knowing that that's how they feel about me. And like, yeah, it's just...
I mean, it's sad for me to say that so many of the things you say, you know, I've heard so many times of, you know, other people who, you know, been threatened, you know, just very kind of casually threatened, you know, I wouldn't have you in my life at all if you voted for that party or whatever, and then not knowing secretly that they did or whatever. So they really are a cohort of people that they just can't handle much, you know. You kind of have to flip it that way, or at least that helps me. Yeah. So I mean, was being on like GB News, Talk TV, all of that, like, how did that feel? Was it nerve-wracking?
To be honest, it wasn't nerve-wracking. It was almost like all of the practice I'd had on student radio had sort of brought me to this point. And I was like, well, I've got to do well here to firstly get my point across. And also, if I want a career in journalism, I knew that what was going on was like, I need to make the most of this. And so I think that first interview I did on GB News with Emily and Adam, I think it was, those two when I was on. And I think people were moved by, or not moved, but people were outraged by the story. But I think the fact that I managed to do very well in the way that I presented myself, which afterwards I couldn't believe how well it went. And I think that sort of helped my cause. But yeah, it wasn't nerve-wracking because, to be honest, like, I don't know if you've ever been to the GB News, and because you can go and watch Free Speech Nation for free and just be one of the audience members. But when you're in there, when you're in TV studios and radio studios, it never really feels like you're on telly. To me, it feels like you're on the Truman Show, and you forget that like thousands of people are watching.
What's it like? What's your kind of opinion of GB News now? Like, because for so long, you know, people are like, "Oh, that alt-right news channel," but now I feel like it's the only mainstream news channel that are like always talking about debate and free speech.
Yeah. I have to say I'm absolutely addicted to GB News. And before I went on, I would watch clips, and I'd want to be watching, but I was kind of like, oh no, I can't start watching GB News, because I was aware of the fact that I had sort of escaped one cult and I didn't want to sort of be sucked into another. But
I get that.
Yeah, I love GB News.
Yeah,
I think they talk about things that no other channel were talking about.
Yeah, and you know, I think you can say that in general the presenters are of the center right, but they still have the other side of the debate on every single time. You know? And they make a lot. There's always the token left wing person to make sure that there is a debate, and that's great. Yeah, and what's kind of disappointing is a lot of those. You know, it's so rare to get one of those people who are like a left wing person, but they can kind of agree with some of the points, or I feel like they always defend everything, because on the right, at the moment, at least at this point in history in the UK and the West, it's easier to disagree on nuanced issues. It's easier to kind of, in right-wing spaces, be like, oh, well, we agree on this thing about immigration, but like we disagree on this thing about tax. And people just think, okay, whatever. Maybe that's not true for kind of Christian fundamentalists, but I feel like in general on the left right now, it's like you get on board or we're kicking you off. And it's like 100% of...
Yeah. Well, that's often why the people on the left who become gender critical are the ones who suffer the worst cancellations, like J.K. Rowling and Graham Linehan. They are left-wing people, and the same with Susan as well from the Women's Rights Network. Whereas if you're already right-wing, of course you're not going to believe in the idea that men can be women, probably from a perspective of women do certain things and men do certain things, rather than actually we shouldn't be children, that in order to be a woman you do a certain thing. Like, and I feel like I have to explain that to people, that I'm coming at it from a feminist perspective, not a Matt Walsh perspective. Whereas yes, we probably agree on the damage that's being done to children, but he is much more from a conservative point of view, that we don't want to rock the boat when it comes to gender roles, and that, I do think there are certain roles that women are probably more suited to do than men are, and vice versa, but we are coming from very two different camps.
Yeah, Connie, thank you so much for this. I'll have to have you back on because it's been great, and there's always more
Definitely.
things to talk about. Good luck with all your future appearances. I'm gonna watch all of them, and I'm behind you every step of the way.
Thank you, Jack.
So what's next for you? Where can people see what's coming up?
So my ex is just _Connie Shaw, and I'm on Instagram, ConnieShaw.fringe, Connie Shaw, one word, .fringe. And that's where you can find everything, links to my Substack. Not that there's much on there, but basically it's very difficult because I'm still at university and I still have a degree to do, and I have a dissertation to write. So it's very annoying because academic work feels very insignificant when everything else in the world is going on.
Yes. Yeah.
So yeah, once I graduate uni, I have a lot of stuff in store for after I graduate.
Ooh,
so
okay.
yeah, I'm looking
cool. Well, you're doing a great job at balancing all of it, and make sure you protect your energy. I'm sure in this world there's going to be people who not like very moral me, but people who want to take advantage of a story and all that kind of stuff. So
yeah,
but I'm sure you have a good support network.
Yeah.
So Connie Shaw, thank you so much.